Thanks, James. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. Thank you. I'm glad to be here and great presentations. Some of what I'm going to say may sound redundant, which means that the two speakers ahead of me are definitely on the right track, but let's get started. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so basically what happened was, in talking about our goal of what we call rebalancing DOTs with big tech, I think the use of the third-party mapping navigation apps is becoming more and more prevalent every day. So the agencies within the Eastern Transportation Coalition started to discuss how they could become more involved and be able to inject like the DOT needs directly into the third-party product roadmaps. And so the question was how to start doing that. And we looked at approximately 9 different mapping companies. Waze is not on that because in this particular slide, because we chose Waze as our first target, so to speak. But the thought process is that we could successfully approach Waze, all 18 agencies, core agencies working together as one unified voice, then we would have a roadmap to be able to work with the other companies seen moving forward. So that was the kind of the overarching game plan. So we started the process of how to approach Waze. And what we did was we ended up, we held a technical workshop, and we had representatives from 14 of our member states there. They created a technical memo talking about things they would like to see in terms of data being brought out to the travelers. We got sign off from all of our executives in our executive board, our CEOs, every one of them from all our member states, which I think was pretty powerful impact. And then we approached Waze with this request to say, we'd like to work together to improve your app and get better traveler information data out there. And they responded, yep, to validate our choice. They said, yes, we'd like to. So next slide, please. To validate the choice of starting with Waze, they shared with us this metric. This was back when we first started working with them. Basically, it talks about the first column deals with the states. You've got some peak active daily users, off-peak users, but basically the bottom line was that when you look at these user metrics, they dwarf most agency 511 stats. So by choosing Waze to start out with, I think we had made a good first pick. Next slide, please. So what we had to do, and again, I'm looking at this from a global, multi-agency level. We asked, okay, what agencies, what are you sending to Waze? What exactly, are you sending? And it turns out only a quarter of our members really communicated with Waze via a live feed, okay? Todd spoke a lot about the map editor, the tool of the map editor, which is more of a manual. A lot of this discussion has to do with live feeds and API feeds, but you could see that most of the states had signed the Waze for Cities agreement, but many of them and most of them didn't have a working partner data feed at the time we started. There were about 6 states, North Carolina being one of them, and the Pennsylvania Turnpike also being one of them, but most of them didn't have a working data feed. And that middle column that talks about non-working partner data feed talks about some of those feeds that were up and running were no longer running due to changes or issues. So there were challenges there. And the last column talks about a road closure tool. Most of them weren't using the road closure tool in Waze, and those that said yes had no parent report. So there was a lot of disconnect, I guess is what I want to say. It's what we had what was being sent back and forth, I guess. So we had to get everybody on the same page. So the next step we did, next slide, please, is we asked Waze, what are agencies really sending to you via a feed? Because some states, Georgia may have said something like, yes, we're sending data to Waze. Delaware may have said, I don't remember, we were sending data to Waze, but in actuality, at the time we started working directly with Waze, and we were working not only with their product team, but their engineering team. This chart actually shows about there were 6,400 alerts within a 6-week period back in November when we first started working with them in 2020. And these were the 6 states that were actually sharing data with Waze. So Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont all share the same ATMS system. But the other 3, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and PA Turnpike, were on track, and we're really sending data to Waze via the multiple feeds like you just saw from Todd. So when we talked to the states, and we talked to Waze, some of the questions we were asking them were simple, like, what are you using the map editor tool directly? Because if you're using the map editor tool, it wouldn't show up in a feed many times. Or if you're integrating Waze into your ATMS system, are you doing it on the front end, bringing the Waze data in, using it in your system and pushing it out on the other end, other applications? Or are you simply taking your verified HTMS events, pushing them out to Waze that way? So we had to figure out how the states were thinking they were sending data. And working on these processes, we figured out maybe we need to talk about data standardization. How could we get to a better place where we're all literally sending the data, what I call the same fire hose? Right, next slide, please. So in our data standardization efforts, and these have been going on for about 1.5 years, all righty, we really kind of whittled down to the fact that we want to work with the WZDX format, and we want to work with the University of Maryland RITIS feed. And the idea behind that is that if we can get a common type of data feed that's being sent to Waze that all of the states, our member states, can take advantage of, we would all get the same type of data out there. So when you look at the chart, when we first started, and as you saw, there was very few that were sending data. Well, this is the current status right now, where you have, for example, Massachusetts has a live feed right now. Rhode Island's feed is active. Connecticut and New Jersey and New York, the feed is active. So we've started from maybe 6 states, and we're started to move to the point where we have more states providing incident data. And I speak to the fact that this is what they call incident data. I don't want to call it news data, but it's like there's a crash, there's a construction project, there's a pothole, but it didn't have any closure information. It didn't have any routing information or lane impact or lane configuration information. So I'll get to that in a second, but the idea was we took the first path of let's get the incident data feeds up and running, getting them active, so that at least we're getting some data out there to Waze through our operations centers. You'll notice that in the chart, it also says things like Massachusetts had nearly 89,000 impressions on Waze users, or Rhode Island 21,000 impressions in March. Next slide, please. I'm going to tell you what that's about. So an alert is different from an impression. So the impression, if I define a Waze impression, all right, and I want to note that impressions have dramatically increased in Waze because of the work that we're doing with the incident feed, is that a Waze impression is when a user sees like a piece of content. If a Waze user adds a hazard icon, a vehicle stopped on the shoulder ahead, and it runs through the algorithm and it gets posted on the app, on the app, a certain number of drivers that are read out they're read out a message verbally, they pass a pin, that's called an impression. So the idea behind this, as you can see, we did a 6-week interval just of this year, May and June, and about 10 million alert impressions made on Waze users from these partners. You can see the partners that are really doing a lot of powerful work in terms of sending data out and through the app that the users are seeing. Okay. Let me go next slide, please. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We have, and again, we meet twice a year with the Waze product and engineering teams, once typically in June, once in December. And we have 2 concurrent paths that we're working on. One of them is the data and the data standardization path I was speaking about. But also we've got something called product enhancements. And the idea behind that is that if we want to help inject what we need and what we want them to show on their app, and we have to be very careful when we do this because it's a free app. We're not paid. We don't pay them to do this. We have to be very careful in how we do this. We talked about how could we get dynamic speakable hazards, a new product feature or enhancement implemented into the system so that it speaks to you. It's not an alert. Let's say it's not something you have to look at. It speaks to you. The challenge is going to be with the second initiative is that the hazards, the speakable hazards allows users to receive the audible alerts. And it's designed for events such as work zones or lane shifts or emergency routing. But the important piece, and I think that Todd and Nathan also hit on it earlier, is that they're looking at road closure and lane impact information. They don't necessarily have all of that. They're ready to launch this new feature. The infrastructure has been built to do it, but they can only do so effectively with access to that type of road closure and lane impact data. Now, again, I'm speaking through the work that's done through feeds, not necessarily through the manual map editors, because you can send them load closures that way. Alrighty. So again, devil's in the details on how we do this, but we're trying to get this. Waze has accepted the WZDX standard data format. They said that they can take data within that format and push it forward. And then we're working with RITIS and the University of Maryland RITIS platform, again, another analytics platform to get data, road closure and lane impact data pushed to them. But again, it's a process. The current, so basically one more slide, please, before the next slide, please. So what we talk about these audible speakable hazards, and we talk about road closures, we talk about lane impacts. What they mean, what Waze really means is that currently right now, the alert structure, the way it's set up in the app, it forces the reporter to choose between a full closure, a lane closed alert, doesn't have much additional information, or all other type of alerts. There's no really information about lane impact. So what they're doing is to work on improving the structure to give the better info to drivers. So it gives them a reason and an impact of the alerts they see. So as I mentioned, they're ready to ingest what we call structured lane impact as additional info for various types of feeds. For example, it might look like this. The alert type would be an accident. Lane impact would tell you which number of lanes is closed. Once they start to get that type of data from the states, then they're going to look at updating lane closure indication on the UI and lane closure incorporating in the driving guidance. So I think in a nutshell, that's kind of the current state of our work with Waze. There's a lot more work to still be done, but we've made really great strides in getting incident data, like the crashes and the congestion and the work zones out to them. And the next step is going to focus on how to get better closure data, as well as structured lane impact information to them via the data feeds. Okay, next slide, please. So then we said, okay, we're on a good path with Waze. Tomorrow Waze is going to be in the room of a meeting I've got. They're very engaged. But we decided to do more data digging and say, okay, we started asking more questions to the agencies about who should we approach next? Who's the next target on that? Because there's 9 of them, nine of these mapping companies. What's the next target? Is it Google Maps? So last October, we held a workshop where we evaluated a survey that we put out to the agencies. And this survey basically asked about these 5 product feature facets and how the agencies were using them. So we asked about map segments. And what that means is that, for example, updating the base map. What do you use for updating your base map, or adding roads or deleting roads? We asked about permanent hazards, giving information to drivers about things like long-term construction or icy bridges or safety messages. And then we talked about, what do you use for real-time incidents? What do you use for driver routing? What do you use for travel time data? Came back with a whole bunch of information from all of our agencies. Next slide, please. So what we found in the survey was that this chart basically says is a proportion of platform users who use platform for each facet. So when you look at this, you look at Waze, you can see that 100% of the agencies who responded, and those were all of our members, use Waze in some manner, shape, or form to look at real-time incidents. So we felt almost vindicated or validated, whatever you want to call it, that starting with Waze was the great approach to use. We then saw map segments. Okay, Google, almost 90% of the agencies are using Google map segments. So that's where we're going to start. The next slide, please. The interesting piece of this, though, is that when we took each of those facets and we looked at this, giving map segments, when you look at this chart, you can see here that the Google is the most used. Okay, it was most used, but it's also the least effective and the least relied upon. So what does that mean? Reliance is how hard a TMC leans on a capability. In other words, how much do TMCs count on a particular use of a navigation app? Okay. On the other hand, effectiveness is how does a facet function? All right. In other words, something can work well, but not be used by a TMC much. In other words, the TMC can use a facet, but it can be improved by a facet can be improved. So we said that, this is leverage here. Google's used, it's the most used, but it's the least effective and the least relied upon. We have an opening to go and outreach to Google Maps. Next slide, please. Then we also had, next slide. Here we go. Then also we had this happen back in January of this year, January 3rd and 4th. We had that interesting snowstorm, January 3rd and 4th on I-95. I'm sure some of you remember motorists stranded for 27 hours. When you have senators that are stranded on a corridor, it's never a good thing. And so the problem statement that we were able to approach Google with was to say, open an IRL, which means open in real life. It's closed on Google via automation. A lot of the closures happen via literally AI. It was 6 hours to get the corridor reopened, massive impact, political attention, the whole 9 yards. So there was a lot of pressure all of a sudden on what I've seen in the chat box, how Google doesn't always get it right. Google Maps it's not always correct. How do we fix that? Now, Waze is owned by Google. You would think that the Waze feeds, which tend to be a lot more precise, would be something that Google would just take on and capture. Not always that. So next slide, please. What we did was we approached Google, and we approached Google, again, the same almost methodology, technical memo, a signature from our CEOs, and said, we want to talk and we want to work with you. We've been working with Waze. They knew about this, but we said, this is our objective. The roadways that are open in real life and appear as closed in Google Maps are able to be removed in operationally acceptable timeframes. So we are looking for, we call it the Google Escape Pod. We would like to have Google, I guess is the word, select or confirm that we have authoritative sources within each of our agencies who can go onto a Google map, and remove an erroneous closure. Todd, I think you, from Turnpike, you might be able to already do that, but that's what we're looking for. So we're in the process right now of gathering who are called authoritative sources who will be able to go in and approved by Google, who could go in so that when you have a ramp closed for 6 days, and you can't reach anybody because no one responds to you, you can have an authoritative source who can go in and get that removed. These are the key results that we're trying to do. We're trying to reduce time from identification of incorrect closure to removal. We'd like to do that in less than 5 minutes if we can. We have an authoritative source. Google Maps can log instances of error to measure current problem, and Google Maps can reduce instances of error caused by automation. This is kind of where we're going with Google right now. Next slide, please. So, and this is what it would look like. So the idea is that an authoritative source could get in there, could take out that erroneous closure if need be. Next slide, please. And so in summary, we've done a lot of great work with Waze. We're building a very strong relationship with them, and we're starting to build that same relationship with Google. In summary, looking ahead, I think we need to continue our work with the feeds, the data feeds that we're doing, get better at standardizing with the WZDX format, and then adding new feeds to increase user impact so they can get what we call the lane configuration, lane impact, closure data, and then explore more opportunities. With that being said, that's the presentation.